I am Ferdinand Marcos, and I am the President of the Republic of the Philippines. I stand today on behalf of 110 million Filipinos.
Hi everyone, hello universe, it's me again. Shoutout sa inyo mga beswa. Sa mga Marcos loyalists and supporters, hello mga bes. Ayan, sa Pilipinos, mga Pilipinos and OFW, hello mga beswa. Ayan, shoutout sa inyo. But anyway, mayroon tayong upload video updates. Alam niyo po to si Sec.Gibo ay pumunta ng US ito mga bes, ano? Hindi ko alam kung ano po ang sadya niya. Pero talaga namang si Sec.Gibo palaban talaga. Panoorin nyo guys ng buo, medyo haba ito. Tingnan nyo kung paano niya sinupalpal ang China dito. Binunyag niya yung mga pinagagawa nila dyan sa West Philippine Sea. At ay nako, matapang talaga rin ito si Sec.Gibo mga besa. Palaban din, ha? Kaya ako siguro, if ever natatakbo ito sa pagkapangulo, tapos Vice President niya si Speaker, magandang tandem yan mga kababayan. Ha? Oh, di ba? Ano palagay nyo? Palaban ito, tingnan nyo, panoorin nyo yung interview niya. Talaga namang walang kagatul-gatul mga kababayan. At isa pa ha, hindi po kaya ni Sara Duterte, ha? Yung mga sinasabi ni Sec.Gibo. Kasi ito, very well experienced ito guys. Bihasang bihasa sa pamumuno, sa totoo lang. Ha? Tumakbo ng pagka-presidente ito eh. Ewan ko anong taon yun. Pero natalo po siya. So, dahil dito mga beswa, ha? See you again on my next upload video. Follow me guys. Don't forget to like, hit the button bell para lagi kayong updates. Okay? Panoorin nyo ito. Eto na.
Secretary Gilbert Teodoro, what a privilege it is to have you here on Stanford's campus and at Hoover and on Battlegrounds. Welcome. Great to be with you.
Well, it is an honor to be with you here, General Pastor, and to be given the opportunity to articulate vital issues in the Indo-Pacific, particularly from the Philippine perspective. So it is indeed an honor, and I look forward to the conversation.
Well, you know, the Philippine perspective is always important. It's, I think, even more important now than ever, given the dynamics in the South China Sea, in the Indo-Pacific region broadly, but also, you know, just given our history, you know, the long relationship, the long alliance with the Philippines going back to the defense relationships in 1951, but of course the shared experience that we had, you know, during World War II, and you know, of course, Philippines becoming a Commonwealth, getting independent, and now really just so critical to countering various forms of aggression, especially by the Chinese Communist Party in the South China Sea. But before we get into really the security situation you're confronting today as secretary, could you maybe just your own personal reflections on the U.S. Philippine relationship? What strikes you the most in that long history, and how do you see it as relevant to today?
Well, the most important facet of the multifaceted relationship that we have are people-to-people relationships. People-to-people relationships are the strongest bonding factor that any two countries may have. And as you know, America and the Philippines, we share similar cultural values, similar viewpoints, a sort of common language, because the United States introduced free public education to the Philippines. That's why English is widely spoken. And the robust and enduring relationship that we have continues, and as a matter of fact strengthens as the years go by. There may be a little bit some small dips or zigs and zags, but the trajectory remains the same, constantly towards our shared goals, particularly at this day and age when we confront an attempt to rewrite the international global order to the selfish interests of a big country. We know what that country is. That's China. We are both confronting that attempt, and the permutations of this attempt boil down in the Philippine side to actual occupation illegally of what the Philippines has a right to, which is the West Philippine Sea. Now, for the United States, this is a shared endeavor for the Philippines because we both want a global, rules-based global order, which China wants to disaggregate using redefinitions of history, bits and pieces.
The 9-dash line in the South China
Sure,
Sea.
it's now the 10-dash line.
Yeah, right.
And soon to be probably exponentially greater as they claim that they are the center of the world. Then again, right now, with the distortions that a big power player in the Indo-Pacific is doing, our shared experiences, people-to-people exchanges, cultural similarities, and the values of what life means, the worth of an individual becomes stronger because we face a common challenge.
And I think one of those strong elements of our ties are the extraordinarily strong Filipino-American community, the tremendous diaspora here. You know, when I was the commander of Fort Moore, Georgia, right, which is the amazing Filipino Independence Day celebrations, and I think I'd be a few pounds lighter if I hadn't enjoyed so much Philippine food over the many years at these celebrations.
Well, being here in the Bay Area, you can enjoy the same. Yeah,
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's so good, so good, so good. But I'd like to go back to the serious part of this, which are the challenges that the Philippines is facing. A lot of I'll talk to people in the Indo-Pacific region, in Southeast Asia, and I'll often hear them say, "Well, hey, don't force us to choose." And what they mean is between Beijing and Washington. But I think the choice is really between sovereignty and servitude. And the Chinese Communist Party expects servitude, with laying claim to the South China Sea and the surface area of the world through which 1/3 of the world's surface trade flows, for example. Could you talk about the evolution of this assault on Philippine sovereignty, as well as other countries in the region? How have you seen it evolve? I mean, you've been involved in defense of your nation for decades.
Yes.
And when did this become such a severe problem? And how did it evolve over the, say, from the early 2000s to today?
Even further back, I think it evolved into an ideological, conflict between communism and non-communist countries. There was the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, and there was the communist bloc and the free world, and that evolved into the opening up of diplomatic relations between China and the Philippines. And at that time, China's policy was to be to bide its time, to be a little bit more reserved in international engagements, but continuing domestic revolutions in order to spread the communist gospel. Then it evolved into the era of reform and opening up. But at that time, in a spot in the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea, there was a place called Mischief Reef where some structures were erected. And China in 1995 said, "Oh, that is just temporary shelter for our fisher folk." And it evolved to slowly China flexing its muscle in the area. To finally we see an artificial islands created, which are heavily militarized.
Right, and this is really an acceleration, 2014, 2015 period of time.
Yes.
And then President Xi Jinping, Chairman Xi Jinping, comes to visit President Obama. You might recall this, and he says, "Well, we promised not to militarize these islands," which of course he did immediately.
Yes, definitely. And this evolved into the enactment by China of their maritime law, stating that almost all the South China Sea are internal waters of China. And in order to change the global international legal regime, they're occupying it by denying access to the area through swarming of vessels with the euphemisms of their People's Liberation Army Navy, namely the Chinese Coast Guard, where they have these so-called monster ships right now, and the maritime militia, which in an authoritarian regime are one and the same thing. And this evolved into actual conflicts in the area, and particularly in the area of Scarborough Shoal. In the meantime, if I digress a little bit, in 2016, the Philippines won an arbitral award
Yes.
where declared the Permanent Court of Arbitration declared that the nine-dash line of China had no basis in law whatsoever.
Right.
And Scarborough Shoal, of which China wants to deny not only Philippine presence but Vietnamese presence, was a traditional fishing ground of Vietnam, the Philippines, and China. The succession of President Xi Jinping has ushered in a new era of Chinese aggression and aggressiveness. You have seen the specter of wolf warrior diplomacy.
Yes.
You have seen China challenging the international legal order with its attempt to create a community of shared destiny for the future of humankind.
Which ought to sound very scary to everybody.
Yeah, with
This
Chinese
is the Global
characteristics.
Civilization
Yes.
Initiative as part
Yes,
of it, right?
and all of this, together with the consolidation by President Xi Jinping of power, just goes to point out that these acts will continue. And for whatever reason, the Philippines does not need to make a choice. To go back to your earlier question, firstly, legally, we are treaty allies. We are mutual defense treaty allies. So that should put the question to rest. However, progressing further and deeper, what is being done to the Philippines is forcible stealing of its rights, sovereign rights, in the exclusive economic zone, which the Philippines has the sole right to explore, exploit resources in by China. And doing this through not only words, but through muscle, trying to crowd us out, trying to change narratives, trying to subvert our domestic economy, trying to subvert structures, trying to influence others not to side with the Philippines, and to say that a perfectly legal process which resulted in an arbitral award is a scrap of paper, which is nothing. So, what I'm trying to say now is, for the Philippines, what China is doing makes the Philippines, compels the Philippines to defend itself, to assert our rights against China. So they have only themselves to blame if we are choosing the side of the right, the correct, not the physical right, but the correct side, the correct path, to use their words. Take the right path and the correct route.
Right. Which is what they want, is a subservient relationship, is the right path from their perspective. You've noted, a lot of the acts of aggression, right? Building of islands, weaponizing these islands, really destroying reefs and ecosystems as they're doing it. So I just wonder where's Greenpeace when they ought to be protesting that, or the complete devastation of fisheries, for example. And again, this infringement on sovereignty, and of course they have their eye on energy resources and everything. But could you maybe explain really some more about the tactics? We were talking about some of the aggression, but you've alluded to other tactics as well, ways that they try to co-opt, and then once they co-opt you, to coerce you. Because when I think back to the President Duterte's time, you could say China was relatively successful in co-option of the elements of the Philippines government, And now, of course, President Marcos, as you've mentioned, confronting this aggression, has taken a much stronger stance. Could you maybe describe in more detail the tactics that the Chinese employ, the effect that they've had, and how you've seen the policy of the Philippine government, evolving over the last couple of administrations?
Okay. The tactical advantage of the Chinese in co-option exercises is that they can work with cold cash. They're not subject to FATF or due diligence rules and regulations. So they can co-opt a lot, particularly in marginalized communities and marginalized areas. And they've been doing this a lot till lately when we've been taking positive steps to stop these practices. Secondly, they were able to expand criminal syndicate activities, which also weakened the domestic economy through internet gaming, gambling, human trafficking, drugs, and the like. Thirdly, they have been able to assume fake citizenships and identities to enable them or their agents or people under their influence, because China has only itself to blame. We must digress right now because of their 2017 intelligence law, which mandates every Chinese company or citizen to be an agent of the Chinese intelligence establishment.
Right, has to act as an arm of the government, basically.
Yes, and so they have only themselves to blame if we are suspicious of any Chinese national. How will we know what the bona fide is of this person? Now, they were able to acquire land, curiously alongside strategic.
Yeah, as they have in the United States too.
Yes,
Yeah.
and they have tried and have succeeded in certain cases to make inroads in critical infrastructure. They have succeeded in subverting the establishment of critical industries like a steel industry by depressing the market with substandard steel.
And just dumping the Chinese steel on the international
Actually,
market.
what they
Yeah.
did was to donate for free induction furnaces, which is unproven and bad technology, obsolete mills to certain recipients in the Philippines, were able to produce a substandard steel for the market. However, slowly we have been putting a stop to this. And naturally, there is hacking and other pernicious practices that have been happening. The case of undocumented aliens, the case of drugs, and is slowly being addressed by the Philippine government. And another tactic that they use is the attempt to influence the local governments by sister cityhood initiatives, where a city or a locality gets a favored Chinese treatment. Thirdly, also were research grants given to domestic educational institutions, which are used purportedly as cover for scanning the area, environmental scanning, and so forth and so on. We are watching out with a keen eye on these activities. But then there are the tactics, once again, of misinformation and disinformation. For example, when the Philippines wants to create a more robust deterrent capability, they immediately say that these acts are destabilizing to the region, when they themselves have one of the largest nuclear arsenals, have ballistic capability, and other capabilities which the world does not know, because the government in China is a closed one. They are unaccountable to anyone except the Politburo or the Standing Committee of the Communist Party, whereas the Philippines has an open government. It's transparent. Of course, we have security regulations, but then again, we are accountable to the world. particularly now when we have to be an upholder of international norms of good conduct of countries because we are busy building an international alliance to support international law. So the tactics of China, the United Front Works tactics,
Yes.
are
And for our viewers, this is the department within the Ministry of State Security, the United Front, which advances Chinese Communist Party interests
yes,
through a sophisticated campaign of really political subversion,
yes,
disinformation, cyber-enabled information warfare,
yes,
co-option through organizations like the Chinese Students and Scholars Associations. You've mentioned a lot of their tactics, but all this is united front work, according to the Chinese Communist
which,
Party.
according to their party documents, is part and parcel of their international initiative.
Yes.
Really. And what people should realize is what's the goal of this? This is a goal to recreate the international order to be dominated by China, because still in party documents, the greatest threat to China is the United States. After you have financed a lot of their technology, after you have financed a lot of their power.
Absolutely.
So it is also a lesson for future leaders that in closed societies, we should really be very perspicacious in what we empower them with,
Right.
because this can be a force for international coercion.
Absolutely. And not to assume that we can either change them to be like us or mirror image them to think that they'll behave in the same way. And China certainly has been quite successful at weaponizing its mercantilist statist economic model against us, as well as trying to rewrite the rules of international discourse in a way that favors their authoritarian form of governance. You mentioned some of the technological means. Could you maybe share with our viewers a little bit about what China did in the Philippines under the auspices of a Safe Cities initiative and the infusion into the Philippines of communications hardware, for example, for fifth generation communications from Huawei and others, and because this model applies not just to the Philippines but to many other countries where they're using technological means as well as all these other elements of their strategy to create a servile relationship through co-option and coercion.
Yes, through the Safe Cities initiative, China sort of financed a lot of command and control mechanisms for cities where they would install CCTV cameras, they would install facial recognition software, ostensibly to enable a faster reaction time for any incident, for incident response. Secondly, for crime prevention. And thirdly, for social services deployment, so that, for example, a flood would happen, there would be some communications capabilities. They also had a toehold into the third telco in the Philippines, which was Huawei Finance. However, we know the costs of this. The cost would be Chinese monitoring and Chinese information gathering. And so the government is well aware of these, because the Chinese cannot deny the fact that a lot of the exit points of information illegally gathered had IP addresses in China. That is a fact that they cannot controvert. I know I'll receive a lot of brickbats over this, but that's the truth, and the truth hurts.
Well, and now it's so obvious in the United States too, with the penetration of our telecoms, the exfiltration of all this data, the penetration of our Treasury Department most recently. I mean, it's really, it should be obvious to everyone, don't you think? I mean, at this stage.
And what is sad is that we'd like to see an economically robust China as a market for our products for international trade. Yet, the exchanges in technology have undoubtedly resulted in theft of intellectual properties and in improper ways. we've seen pictures of their next generation fighters, which looks surprisingly similar to
Right. Right.
other aircraft that we've seen, even their combat attack helicopters, which look surprisingly
exactly.
similar to.
Even the last generation, the J-20
Yes,
is the F-22. I mean, they look the same for obvious reasons, right?
yes, and they disdain the West.
And to your earlier point about us underwriting our own demise, essentially, through investments in Chinese companies. I mean, two big investments in 2014 went into Chinese companies that now do all their battlefield artificial intelligence and have done the People's Liberation Army's offensive cyber tools. And you mentioned safe cities. Big U.S. investments went into SenseTime, the company that does a lot of the artificial intelligence-based data analytics, and Hikvision, which makes these cameras with the facial identification technology and so forth.
But also, with this Safe Cities initiative, of course, domestic happenings in the United States are used as a prime example of why the Chinese model is better.
Right. Yeah.
Because we really don't know how safe Chinese cities are, and we know how safe certain areas in the United States or in the Philippines, for that matter, are. And
Are the 1.1 Muslims who are in concentration camps, are they safe? No, I mean, right. It's just sort of it's obviously hypocritical for them.
well,
August would.
I'd like to share with you that when they started to message about our capability upgrades, it's clearly an interference into the internal affairs of the Philippines. So I started to talk about the human rights situation in China too. So what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, and they accused me with ideological bias, whatever that means. So,
Right. And of course, when we make these criticisms, I think the intention is to advocate for the Chinese people, not against the Chinese people. I also wanted to ask you about how you and the president have responded to this, because from my perspective, it's been with tremendous strength. We saw in August, for example, of this past year, 7 acts of war, at least I interpreted them as acts of war, against Philippines armed forces as they were trying to resupply Scarborough Shoal, other very direct threats. But you and the president and in your administration, they put in, I think, a lot of new policies. The opening warm bases for U.S. Capabilities and other allied capabilities, the strengthening relationship with Japan, the strengthening of the Philippine armed forces broadly. But against the whole range of these threats, how can you explain really how you've responded and how the president, President Marcos, has responded?
the first response by the president was a clear-cut statement that he would be resolute in not giving in to any of the claims of China in Philippine territory or in any areas where the Philippines has jurisdiction under international law. The president will not compromise and will be steadfast in that. Secondly, he has been resolute in trying to build an international alliance on the basis of upholding of international law, freedom of navigation, and other important UNCLOS norms like respecting your EEZ. And most importantly, under UNCLOS is the concept.
This is United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, for our viewers.
Yes, it is the concept of an archipelagic country, an archipelagic state, where there are 5 archipelagic states right now. These are states that are composed mostly of islands and not contiguous, one mass of land. So we define our territory, which is really important for us in a security and a defense sense, on the basis of baselines that you draw around the archipelago and project your exclusive economic zone from there. So the president has been absolutely resolute in not wavering from this concept, because a lot of the misinformation coming from advocates of China is that we should manage the conflict. Managing the conflict would mean accepting a status quo where China is in areas where it is not supposed to be. And this is a red line which the president will not compromise on. Secondly, he has been resolute in trying to build an international alliance on the basis of upholding of international law, freedom of navigation, and other important UNCLOS norms like respecting your EEZ. And most importantly, under UNCLOS is the concept.
This is United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, just for our viewers.
Yes, it is the concept of an archipelagic country, an archipelagic state, where there are 5 archipelagic states right now. These are states that are composed mostly of islands and not contiguous, one mass of land. So we define our territory, which is really important for us in a security and a defense sense, on the basis of baselines that you draw around the archipelago and project your exclusive economic zone from there. So the president has been absolutely resolute in not wavering from this concept, because a lot of the misinformation coming from advocates of China is that we should manage the conflict. Managing the conflict would mean accepting a status quo where China is in areas where it is not supposed to be. And this is a red line which the president will not compromise on. Secondly, as we said, alliance building with like-minded nations. The president has done a lot of personal diplomacy to secure the archipelagic baselines and other areas of the Philippines. Thirdly, he is committed to re-engineering our defense establishment from an internal security perspective, because we had the local insurgency, which is now on a minimal stage.
This is the Malawi insurgency against with Abu Sayyaf and Jamaat Islamiyah.
This is the CPP, NPA, NDF.
The communists, right?
The communist
the communist
insurgency.
insurgency, right? The deeper history, yes.
Right.
Yes.
In terms of the terrorism aspect, we are still, although it is minimal and areas are relatively safe, we are still on guard against it, because with the happenings worldwide, it is fertile ground for resurgence of terrorism once again.
Right, and we see it from the Maghreb to the Levant to Central Asia and South. I mean, absolutely.
So this was the crucial internal adjustment that the president made, is to refocus our defensive operations from internal to territorial defense. And in so doing, we evolved the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, where we would have to project deterrence capabilities throughout our exclusive economic zone in order to deter unwanted behavior from irresponsible actors. And the president has been fully committed to this. Domestically too, he has been at the forefront of anti-UFW operations, illegal and subversive operations by alien criminal syndicates. He has banned offshore gambling establishments which were laundering money for other purposes and corrupting a lot of people. And insofar as the U.S. presence in the Philippines, we have, of course, now a security sector assistance roadmap. The important thing with the United States is not merely the strengthening of the bilateral relationship, but the creation of new multilateral ones. We have a trilateral partnership now with Japan, the Philippines, and the United States, and a squad with Australia. The Philippines has recently signed a reciprocal access agreement, like a visiting forces agreement with Japan, which will allow Japanese self-defense forces to train with U.S. and Australian forces for interoperability. And in terms of the enhanced logistic sites, the EDCA sites, Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement sites, these are Philippine bases, mind you. These are not U.S. bases, although the U.S. will have a logistical presence there. And we are very thankful to the United States because in the hierarchy of threats, the Philippines, the president, considers climate change as the number one threat. More than the acts of China. Our 6 typhoons in 1 month, 2 volcanoes acting up, and earthquakes and landslides have really affected our economy and, of course, our resource base for creating a resilient defense. Therefore, the partnership between allies that the president has personally spearheaded has been vital. But in this, the president has been a voice in ASEAN, in the Indo-Pacific, for upholding of international law and opposing any attempt by China to distort this narrative. China approaches the problem as a hold the ball strategy, where a negotiation is just a tactic in order to weaken the opposite side of the table, aka the Philippines, and hoping that it can generate a more favorable political climate to advance. Yet they will not stop their illegal advance.
Right. And they'll just mask in this language of a community of common destiny for all humankind and so forth, which ought to scare the heck out of everybody, I think. Right?
Unfortunately, it has not gained traction. 90% of the Filipinos do not trust the Chinese government. They more than 70 or 80% of the Filipinos support our stand in the West Philippine Sea and South China Sea. More than 80% support the alliance between the United States and the Philippines. And I should say that a lot of our cooperation in disaster response has helped.
Yes.
Has helped.
Right.
The biggest factor that draws the Filipinos against China is now them. When there was a president that said no, they bear their true inner selves, their fangs.
Right. Right. Can I ask you what kind of a reception you're getting in the region broadly? ASEAN is an important organization, but it's based on consensus. Do you see other countries in the region who have come under threat by really China's aggression against their sovereignty? I'm thinking about Vietnam, for example, Malaysia, maybe to a lesser extent, Indonesia, maybe the smaller island nations in Oceania. How's the reception been to kind of a stronger approach by President Marcos relative to President Duterte's policies?
Well, I think the fact is there is no condemnation of President Marcos's position and no support towards China's position overtly. So all claimant nations, I think it's common sense that they would be worried with China's behavior. And Vietnam has been vocal against China's aggression. Lesser so the other two claimant countries, Malaysia and Brunei, naturally. Indonesia is not a claimant country, although they have a conflict with China. They're a bit more, they're further away from the area of contention now in the South China Sea. But then again, I believe that there is a consensus that what China is doing is wrong. However, expressing this consensus was channeled through the mechanism of trying to negotiate a code of conduct with China. So that is the receptacle for the reservations or the fear that other ASEAN countries have against China's expansionism. However, the Philippines will not play with the same playbook as other countries because the threat to us is real. And perhaps it will also be useful to explain why it is so important for the Philippines that we have our exclusive economic zones, our territorial sea. Other people say, hey, it's just a portion of sea. Why fight over it? The Philippines right now has a growing population. Resources are limited. We are a net energy importing country. The sustainability, not only now, but more importantly, of future generations of Filipinos, will rely heavily on the amount of resources we can get within the territory or the areas we have rights over that has been granted to us by international law. So for us,
I need to talk about fisheries and energy and
fisheries,
Right.
energy,
Right.
habitable areas
Right.
being supported by the area.
and of course, you have a strong manufacturing economy
Yeah,
in the
trade.
Philippines and agricultural economy.
Yeah, trade routes.
Right.
Being an archipelago, the Philippines, just like a lot of countries, rely on freedom of navigation and interconnections with other countries, both on the Pacific side and on the South China Sea side. So for us, given the fact that we have a growing population, smaller land base for resources, the exclusive economic zone and other areas is an existential necessity for future generations of Filipinos. So if we compromise with China now, we are robbing the future generations of Filipinos of what is rightfully for them to rely on for their survival in a more volatile world.
I'd like to ask you a question about the connection between this competition with China and having to counter Chinese aggression in your region, in the Pacific, and maybe other conflicts in the world. What do you see as the implications, for example, of Russian aggression against Ukraine, or the war in the Middle East, for example, for your concerns, for your own security, for the Philippines' security? Do you see connections between these kind of cascading conflicts and the looming crises in the Indo-Pacific?
Sure. On the part of any bigger country doing an act of aggression or committing an act of aggression against a smaller country, it is worrisome if this is legitimized by acquiescence, silence, non-condemnation, or non-action by the international organizations of the world. It is worrisome for us because if the world does nothing and we see smaller countries being swallowed up by bigger countries for whatever reason, naturally all smaller countries should worry. It should not be the case. If it shows either that the world order truly needs to be strengthened as to its original intention, that was a mechanism to avoid conflict, avoid war, which is, and if countries take a step back and not and let things be, then the narrative by China then works. That and things need to be changed on a more parochial and domestic sense. The Philippines is a net importer of energy, and the Philippines has citizens deployed, nationals all over the world. So, energy security is vital to our viability as as an international competitive entity. And so the war in Ukraine has affected us through world commodity prices. The Red Sea, Persian Gulf instability affects us a lot. Let us not forget there are more than 20 Filipinos held hostage by the Houthis. And international shipping costs have increased the cost of goods that we need for our daily survival a lot. So all of these conflicts affect the Philippines because we're an archipelagic country, and we need a lot of inputs to make our economy more viable and to give more social services to our people. But in the bigger international sense, since we are facing aggression by a bigger power, namely China, who is flexing its muscle and trying to distort the international narrative to justify its doing so, mirror acts in other places of the world are a matter of concern for us.
Senator Teodoro, I think that's an important point because, there are some who make the argument that we should prioritize the competition with China in the Indo-Pacific, and the way to do that is to almost forget about or deprioritize conflicts elsewhere. And of course, there are so many connections, as we see with North Koreans, fighting alongside, for example, Russians in Ukraine, and China providing, the equipment and hardware that Russia needs to continue its onslaught, or the fact that China's buying 97% of Iran's oil to keep them kind of in the game in their aggression across the region. I'd like to ask you, what are your expectations as a new American administration comes in for the U.S.-Philippine relationship, and how do you see trends in the relationship in recent years, which I think have been quite positive, and what are your expectations for the coming years?
Well, my expectation is that the momentum that is existing at present be continued, because we are not only strengthening a relationship but evolving a new ecosystem of security, not only bilaterally but also multilaterally with other countries with shared values like Japan, like Australia, and the United States has made a lot of inroads also in ASEAN, in advocacy, in building trust and confidence. So we would like to see the momentum continue, that our joint activities continue, the resilience building of the Philippines as not only a partner of the United States, but as a major upholder and enforcer of international norms. That's what this is in the Philippines right now. The world will not listen to us if we stand up and say, hey, this is Philippine territory, plain and simple. But we have a basis for it, which basis we all share. Those are the rules-based international order. And so the Philippines now, as I view it, is a test case of how far smaller countries can go on a sustainable basis in standing up for themselves. And if this momentum is not sustained, then a counter narrative wins. which the world cannot afford, because then there will be only 2 to 3 strong autocratic, undemocratic survivors.
Secretary Theodore, you're talking about kind of really an optimistic perspective among our democracies. I think we've seen that in the U.S.-Philippine relationship. But in our democracies, of course, oftentimes it's ugly, right? Because we're open societies and we have
Yes.
our divisions in the United States. It always came to a contentious election, but I think in pretty good shape. Everybody, there were no questions about the result of our presidential election. In the Philippines, you have your own issues politically between the president and the vice president and the contention between them. But these authoritarian regimes, they look strong from the outside, but I think they're actually quite brittle. Could you maybe share with our viewers your perspective of really Philippines, the Philippine democratic experience, and maybe your confidence in it, even though you see the contention as between your president and vice president come to the surface and is readily available for anybody to see.
I think to go down to the basic human level, Filipinos and Americans enjoy the same things. We can say what we want without any fear that we'll disappear at night. We can publish what we want. We can do basically what we want just as long as we don't violate laws which are enacted by elected representatives. I'm not saying that these laws may be wise or may be economically correct or be efficient. But what I'm saying is that these laws were passed through a process that everybody knows, that if everybody has a beef with what has been passed, it's the system. Whereas with China, we really don't know what's happening. There's no room for dissent in China. And do we see this in China alone? No. We saw it in Hong Kong, where they promised, they promised something and did another. We saw it in Mischief Reef. They went back on their word, and now they distort the narrative that the Philippines is going back on its word. And we've seen history too. The purges. Can we forget that? Can we forget the 45 million who died because of experiments in China through the Great Leap Forward, etc., which they are trying to gloss over now and trying to snowbake or white out.
Right, to give the party the credit for everything.
Yes.
And to blame everything on the so-called central of humiliation.
Yes.
Yes.
So we have our beefs with societies. There are costs to this, but the immutable is freedom. We have the liberty to do things that people in China, unfortunately, cannot. And in other societies, too. I mean, in certain countries, we've seen billionaires lose it overnight because they went against the powers that be. Now, given the fact that there is a new administration in the United States, I feel that the interests remain the same. We have built our relationship to this day not on ad hoc responses to threats, but we built an institutional foundation for going forward with our relationship, not only bilaterally, multilaterally. Like we have a Philippine Security Sector Assistance Roadmap. We recently have passed the General Secrecy of Military Information Agreement, which necessitated institutional adjustments that we made in our system, which makes our system a more credible system, a more transparent system, but at the same time, paradoxically, a more operationally secure system. Now, having said that, the interests remain the same, there is a momentum. And I think that it would be very difficult for any person to break that momentum now. And the constant that we face, and which is not of our doing, is China is behaving the way it does. The only way, probably, that our momentum will go somewhere else if China changes its behavior.
Sure.
I mean, if China didn't do what it is doing now, not only in the West Philippine Sea, but in the Sea of Japan or in the East Sea, for that matter, there would be no need for all of these, alliance building mechanisms.
Or even the trend, even in Cambodia, right, which has been under Hun Sen was, you could say, had a servile relationship with China. Cambodia saw the recent visits by the Japanese and U.S. government officials, military visits as well, which would have been unthinkable. So I think the trend seems to be in a positive direction. Thank you, Xi Jinping, right? We should send
Yes.
him flowers and a box of chocolates
Though I
for,
believe so,
for
because
making it clear.
for a
the nature
lot
of the competition.
of what we have been doing, it's because of their actions, but which threaten the territorial integrity and sovereignty of our country.
So, Secretary, what I'd like to ask you for the final question here for our viewers is, what else should our viewers know about the Philippines, and what should they know about the Philippine-U.S. relationship?
Well, the Philippines right now is at the forefront of upholding international norms. And this is not an empty phrase, international norms. But if we fail to uphold what is written down in the United Nations Charter, the treaties right now, we stand the risk of having these norms which we guarantee our way of life, our freedom, resources for the future, particularly of the smaller countries. We stand the risk of having this redefined by active, coercive actions by more powerful countries and by acquiescence by equally, if not more powerful countries too. Therefore, we lose by default or inaction. How important is the Philippines to the United States? It's not merely a treaty ally, not merely a treaty partner, but it is at the forefront in the westernmost area of the Pacific Ocean in enforcing freedom of navigation and other rights that were there for a long, long time and just concretized by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Billions of dollars of trade go through the South China Sea, from the Indian Ocean up the South China Sea and exiting to the Pacific Ocean. If China's narrative that almost all of this is in its internal waters, then it would have closed off a vital shipping channel of which U.S. livelihoods depend, Canadian livelihoods depend on, and other Pacific-facing countries rely on. And it will also disrupt and distort world prices of all commodities. And translated, that means more dollars for X quantity of X goods. But more importantly than that, there is an attempt to reshape the world as we know it. Our world is an imperfect world, definitely. It's full of crises because it treats states as individual actors. And unfortunately, the good faith that we show other states by embracing their opening up has been irresponsibly managed and taken advantage of by these states. You see violations of international protection, etc. And you've seen also the subversion of the U.S. economy by China. Now, China is an active attempt, as its documents show, and they're not hiding it, of reshaping the world order. And if we do not stand up, the United States does not stand up with the Philippines in upholding the UN Charter, the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. And mind you, not only the United States is supporting the Philippines here, The G7 is supporting it. The EU is supporting it. Several non-EU countries, like the United Kingdom, is supporting it. New Zealand, for a long time, has laid back from international military engagements. They now want a status of forces agreement with us, which we are negotiating, because they see the danger posed to them, far away as they are, by China's actions in the South China Sea. So if New Zealand alone feels that they are threatened, more so should the United States. And the focal point, the fulcrum of all of this is the Philippines. And I think by our actions internationally, we have proven our good faith, our responsibility as an ally, and we will be resolute by not looking for conflict. But we will not back down from any attempt to subvert our country and to take away any part of any of our territory or any area where we have sovereign rights from us, because these do not belong to us physically now, but for the survival of our future generations. And so, to join with the Philippines means to join in upholding a world of norms, of freedoms, and a way of life which respects everybody's way of life, and without reintroducing a new narrative or an Orwellian narrative of a world of the future.
Well, Mr. Gilbert Teodoro, I can't thank you enough for your leadership at this critical moment.
Thank you.
And for your visit and for joining us on Battlegrounds to help us understand better a battleground that's critical to all of our futures. Thank you so much.
Well, I thank you for giving us the opportunity to articulate our position, and hopefully we make an impact, because the world needs it.
Well, you are making an impact. What a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow.